Let's talk Trek again, and if you want to see one of the best crafted episodes of Star Trek you will find in this era of television, then you should absolutely watch The Orville. Season 3, Episode 4 just came out, The Sound of Gently Falling Rain, because it is approximately 100 billion times better made sci-fi and television than this week's episode of Strange New Worlds. I mean, what was the entire point of this episode, even existing in the tone and execution it did, especially so early on in the show's run? It is terrible. It is bad Star Trek. It is bad sci-fi. It is bad television. It is bad writing. It's bad. And please believe me, I hate saying that. I really do. I know a few of the titles and thumbnails of this review series have seemed to be some provocatively negative stuff. I even had a few comments from people last episode who clearly didn't even watch the video before commenting and just saw a thumbnail with the words "please stop," which is, by the way, a line of dialogue from a scene I broke down in that episode review, by the way, and they just assumed that I'm one of those so-called hater YouTubers who use bitching about media as their whole gimmick because, well, hate clicking is a thing. Thank you to those of you, by the way, who do listen, consider and then react to what I have said, and therefore know that I have been very largely positive and full of praise for Strange New Worlds so far. But this week, I can't do it. Hello again, I am Blunty, and man, I'm really sorry, but I have precious few positive things to say about this week's episode, and that honestly bums me out. This was a very hard review and examination to make. It really was. The Elysian Kingdom is episode 8 of Strange New Worlds Season 1, and with it down, we have just 2 more episodes to go. And there's been some rumbling among the fandom about how Strange New Worlds only having a 10-episode long Season 1 is just a terrible and disappointing thing, and, you know, other shows get way more episodes, and I've been unconcerned with that, really. I mean, as good as Strange New Worlds has been, more of it sure would be better, yeah, but quality over quantity is my preference anyway. And from the 7 episodes before this, 6 have been at least good, most have been terrific in fact, and one of them, it wasn't terrible, but as I mentioned in its review, I very much doubt I will bother with it ever again when I do a season rewatch. I'll just skip it, because as a rewatching experience, that one holds no real value for me, like at all. And the same is true of this episode, except even more so. I will never choose to rewatch it. It's bad. It is utterly valueless as an episode of Strange New Worlds, in my opinion, even if it does actually change the status quo for one of the main cast members in a very sort of basic way. Now, I rewatch Trek regularly, usually 1, sometimes 2 full series rewatches of Trek in a year. I'll do a complete rewatch, end to end, season 1, episode 1 to the very last episode of the very last season. And there's very few episodes within each series that I will skip. Even most of the wobbly ones are still worth watching again for something in them. And yes, even Threshold I rewatch sometimes. One of the worst episodes of Trek ever made, but I'll still watch it because, well, you gotta hand it to Robert Duncan McNeill, who knew damn well what a piece of crap that episode was, and he still poured 100% effort into the job he was doing. You have to respect that. I do, however, skip Sub Rosa every TNG rewatch because yikes. In any case, the Elysian Kingdom delivers us an entirely wasted episode from what now suddenly feels like a very limited 10-episode season. Now, as we start in the previously on Star Trek Strange New Worlds, we have Hammer re-established, and he's been MIA for a few episodes now, and I'm all, hell yeah, Hammer episode, let's go! But no, don't get your hopes up on that one, because it's not that. So the setup. The ship's having a quiet day, just finishing up some survey work on a nebula nearby. Everyone's chill. Spock and Pike are gently teasing one another in a very cute way. Ortegas and Pike continue to be a little playful with one another, and everything's nice and fine and lovely, and I'm loving that. In sickbay, Dr. Who Gives a Shit is re-establishing his one defining trait as a character, a sick kid, bizarrely and nonsensically being held in suspended animation in the buffer of the medical transporter, despite, as I've established in other videos, actual perfectly working and functional, well-proven suspended animation technology having existed long before the Federation itself even existed as an entity, which would serve as a much safer and more reliable way to keep his daughter's sickness from progressing while he works on her treatment, without having to lie about it, without having to compromise vital and essential medical resources in sickbay. Because remember how the doctor refuses to allow maintenance, basic maintenance, or even an upgrade to the medical transporter so it can work better as a life-saving tool as it is intended to be, all because he's keeping his kid there secretly? That makes him a shitty person in my books, putting other lives at risk to keep his pointless secret when there are other options to keep his daughter safe anyway. Screw you, Doc. So anyway, he's reading his kid a story, a fairy tale of heroes and wizards and kings and whatnot, and there's some painfully obvious foreshadowing about writing her own stories when she grows up. And also, I don't care. I just don't care about either of these boring, wooden, uninteresting characters. I don't care. Do you care? Anyway, back on the bridge, time to go, but whoops, the ship won't move. The engines seem fine. It's probably the nebula being weird, despite them having just finished a few days' worth of intense study of the nebula with their most sophisticated scanners and equipment, and having not noticed one single weird thing about it, suddenly they think there might be a weird thing about it. Oh, but don't worry, somehow another quick scan from engineering later on easily reveals the weird thing about the nebula, because that's when the plot needs them to know about it and notice it and be able to detect it with their sophisticated scanners. So, unable to go to warp, they decide to putter away from it under impulse power, hoping to get out of the range of whatever weird space MacGuffin radiation is balking up the warp bubble. Ortegas is standing up at her station, despite it being designed to be used seated, because the plot needs her to smash her face into a concussion, because for some reason at that exact moment the inertial dampeners don't work anymore and the ship lurches forward. And the plot needs that to happen because the plot wants the Doctor on the bridge. So, Dr. I Don't Care pops up to the bridge after a little red herring bullshit with his bizarrely high school level chemistry set, which, despite the obvious volatile nature of the medical substances he's working with, Dr. Incompetence is working without any safety gear at all, not even so much as a mask or gloves even, not even an apron. Just because he's shit at his job, as well as being a shit person, clearly. So, anyway, he gets to the bridge, and everyone is in weird costumes and acting like they're not the competent actors they have shown to be thus far in the series, and from here on in, the episode gets not just stupid, but pointless. So, we're doing that whole, the crew gets trapped in a fantasy land thing, and in this case it's the same fairy tale structure of the book Dr. Notbones was reading to his uninteresting Sproglump. Now, when sci-fi leans into plopping its characters into other fictional genres, it can work fantastically great. The Big Goodbye on TNG, Bride of Chaotica on Voyager, both holodeck-based episodes, and the thing that is fun about those is the characters are out of place, playing along with the holodeck story while trying to fix whatever problem it is that has them forced to participate in the fiction, because not doing so would be a problem for whatever reason. Usually that reason is they're against aggressive characters and the safeties have malfunctioned, so they can actually be hurt on the holodeck for a change. So Picard gets to lean into his Dixon Hill detective character, and it's fun to see him indulge in that, because you don't get to see Picard indulge very often in that kind of stuff. Tom and Harry get to play into a 1950s style sci-fi serial, the place where sci-fi shows like Star Trek can trace their origins back to. It's very cute meta commentary without getting too wink wink nudge nudge about it. By the way, super fun and obscure fact about Captain Proton. The costume that Tom wears while playing Captain Proton is a direct copy from a cheesy old movie serial called Radar Men from the Moon. There was a Mystery Science Theater episode about it, and I was watching it just last year, and all of a sudden it dawned on me why the hero's rocket suit was so familiar. And so I Google image searched up Captain Proton. Isn't that amazing? I love that. It's brilliant. Anyway, the episodes like this are usually fun. I usually enjoy them. But then you get the occasional one that takes our cast, but instead of having them play themselves, having to play along with a fiction, you get the ones where most of them become the fiction itself. Like DS9's Owlman Bashir, where through a series of don't think too hard about it plot devices, seriously don't think too hard about it, Julian and Garrick have to play along with a James Bond-inspired story where several other crewmates are kind of essentially possessed by holodeck characters. Cisco, for example, is in the role of a James Bond-style supervillain trying to blow up the world. It's dumb and it's cheesy and it's fun and strengthens one of that show's most interesting pairings, that of Bashir and Garrick, in a really interesting way. The episode is cheesy and stupid, but they make it work because it serves the plot and it serves the characters. But then you have episodes like Far Beyond the Stars, which sees the entire cast play wholly different characters. Set in the early 1950s, it still had links to DS9 as a thematic device, and despite being extremely different to a normal episode of that show, it was so well crafted. It remains utterly compelling and among the best the show has to offer. And I'm sure if this was a new episode in one of the new series, like exactly the same, but in the new series, the usual troglodytes we see in the fandom these days will be calling it woke and too political and forced diversity because it says loud things about racism and misogyny, as if Star Trek has not always been yelling those things at the top of its voice. So, back here in Strange New Worlds, without a holodeck, the explanation for being stuck in a fantasy is a weird alien did it. And yeah, we've seen this MacGuffin before too, this trope before. Q likes to do that stuff. Before him in the original series, there was the Squire of Gothos and Trelane, who a lot of people like to think about retconning into being a member of the Q continuum themselves. Not sure I'm entirely convinced by the argument, but that might be another video altogether. I know certainly Jean Delancey, who plays Q themselves, used that character and that performance as inspiration. But anyway, there was a fistful of others who either have fancy technology or godlike powers who've done this sort of trickery stuff before. But the problem here, in this example, is all but two of the crew are playing entirely different characters. And like I just said, that can and has worked brilliantly in Far Beyond the Stars, for example, and indeed was easy to accept in Far Beyond the Stars as a premise because at that point we've already had 6.5 seasons of DS9, the cast was deeply established, so shuffling it up was refreshing and engaging, not confusing and distracting like it is here. They earned their way to an episode like that. The other difference was that episode had something worth saying. This one does not. Here in Strange New Worlds, we've had just 7 episodes. Most of the crew we barely know as themselves at this point, and now they're all playing these pantomime child's fairy tale characters. It's deeply off-putting. Pike is a snivelling coward, Ortegas is a trigger-happy knight or something. Number 1 is some weird forest archer who wants to bone down the forest itself. I don't know, it's all stupid garbage. They haven't earned their way to any of this yet. It's weird. It's distractingly out of place. It is a non sequitur on a show-wide scale. None of this works because we're still getting to know who they are, so them playing something different isn't meaningful. And it has nothing interesting to even say while doing this. So making them play against type, just wholly different roles and characters is it's a dumb choice. And an utter waste of screen time in its entirety. I'll tell you what though, you know who did do a superb job on this episode? The wardrobe and costume designers. Everyone in this episode looks amazing. It's a pity the episode's so shit and no one will want to cosplay any of this, and I can't imagine many will be rewatching this episode over and over and over again because it's shit. So great job, but man, what a waste in effort. So much work and talent and effort on the costumes for an episode that will sink into the deepest layer of obscurity and pointlessness. Yikes. Now, our primary point of view for this farce is the Doctor, who is so poorly characterised in writing and in performance to this point I struggle to care about him as a person even slightly. The only other crew member who retains awareness of the changes that have taken place is Hemmer, who I've been gasping for more of. But the Hemmer we get in this episode is so wooden compared to what we've seen before. He is a plot device, not a character. His immunity to the alterations stems from his species being inherently telepathic, so he was able to block the invasive telepathy of the weird nebula brain. And that's fine. The Anar have had this well established already in the Enterprise. They are telepaths. Spock, by the way, as a Vulcan, is also inherently telepathic, and as a Vulcan, his mind has been specifically trained for control. But hey, whatever, let's pretend we don't see that massive plot hole. Hammer spends the vast amount of screen time just vomiting up dry as shit exposition. He gets 2 moments that I consider Hemmeristic at all. The breakout, where he entertains himself with learning an Earthling's word for casting a magic spell, and his sarcasm about not having to worry about going blind because of the magic. And then, once more, we get a Hemmeristic moment where we see Hammer, as we've known him all too briefly so far, as he flourishes again with the wonderful, lightly sardonic theatrics of his science magic. Was that too much? But that's it. Everything else he does and says in this episode is just in service as a mobile plot device. It was so disappointing, as so far I found his unique mix of intellectual wryness and underlying gentleness quite compelling, really compelling. I need to see more of him. I need to know more about him as a person and not as a mobile exposition generator. The whole concept of playing along with the fantasy, indulging in the setting and characters, never feels earnest in this episode. It's cheese for cheese's sake, and it made me cringe way more often than it did what I assume was the intention, that of giggling along at the ludicrousness of it. Isn't that goofy and funny? It's a child's fairy tale. Look at Pike being a coward. No, that was a long way off being close to landing for me. I felt genuinely embarrassed for most of the cast during this episode. The same cringe of embarrassment I felt when watching Plato's Stepchildren or Move Along Home or Nemesis. By the way, DS9 fans, I said the words Move Along Home, and now you have that fucking song stuck in your head. If I have to have it in here right now, then so do you. Count to 4, fuck off. In any case, the whole episode seems to have just been the writers just trying to abandon the whole plot thread of the Doctor and his kid, and the weird fact he was keeping it a secret and lying about it all the damn time and keeping her in the transporter instead of regular suspended animation. It's because the resolution they just rushed to right at the end is just, I don't know, shrug. I guess I'll just let my kid be uncorporealized and live in immortality with this big space brain that's been fucking with us for the shits and giggles for the whole day long, even though we know literally nothing about it except it can warp reality itself on a whim because it feels a bit lonely. Oh, and by the way, for all you know, is lying to you about its intentions right now. It has already demonstrated it can read minds and manipulate reality itself and trick people into believing literally anything it wants for its own purposes. How do you even know that was even really your kid standing there? Could have been bullshit. Probably was. The space brain might have eaten your kid already, but didn't want you to know that because it didn't want your ass blowing it up with a damn space torpedo. Maybe your incompetence in doing your lab work without basic protection and getting a face full of medical chemicals made you immune to their unusual telepathic manipulation for a little while, so they went a different route of emotional manipulation instead to get you to bugger off. For that matter, the instant return of now adult daughter, who's all like, yeah, Dad, it's just been years for me because magic space brain time works differently than your meat-based time. I also named the magic space brain Debbie after my dead mum. Isn't that weird? Hey, Dad, remember dead mum? No, I'm not emotionally manipulating you. Why do you ask? Remember dead mum? Anyway, I'm okay. I'm super duper having fun times with big space brain Debbie back here. No need to come back and check up on me with your ship full of weapons that could ignite the various gases that make up the nebulous space brain Debbie. Just go about your life. I'm cool here with Debbie the space brain. We're fine, thanks. Everything's cool here. Thank you. Boring conversation anyway. I'm off. That could have been, and from the nothing we know about the motivations of the big space brain Debbie, probably was a fabrication. Remember that crappy and kind of creepy episode of Enterprise where Hoshi gets her ass tricked 7 ways to Sunday by a super creepy 400-year-old loner incel alien guy who keeps just kidnapping wives and using Jedi mind tricks to imprison them with no way to escape and then outliving them and burying them in his backyard? And the writers really wanted to make him a sympathetic figure, but anyone with a functioning human soul was infinitely creeped out by. That was still better writing of a manipulative, lonely space alien trying to kidnap people by lying and tricking them than this gibberish was. You want to abandon the whole sick daughter plot? Fine, good. It was a wildly stupid and poorly thought out idea to begin with, and you've realised that, writer's room, and you can't find a way to make it work without making the Doctor a huge asshole who keeps lying to everybody. How about this? How about you just delete the kid? Power failure, battle damage, some dipshit tripped over the battery for the transporter. Who cares? Let the Doctor fail to save her. Let his grief become sympathetic. Make his character use it to become an actually interesting and empathetic entity instead of this wooden liar of a person. Maybe that's too dark for this show. No worries, I get it. Fine. So, have him quit the service on the ship in his grief or in his efforts to save the kid. Or, don't delete the kid at all and have him move to a medical facility where he can help his kid full time and not be distracted by the crew's needs and emergency constantly. And just cast a new doctor for the ship, maybe one who's actually got a personality beyond whisper talking to a dying kid and lying to people about that. I genuinely hated this episode. It had nothing I have been enjoying about the show so much, except for the first few minutes on the bridge of the real crew interacting. That was good, the rest was shite. And unlike every other episode so far, there wasn't even a consistent thematic undercurrent or allegory or metaphor. At least not one that I noticed. And I feel like I'm pretty good at noticing that stuff, right? I mean, Christ on a bike, even the damn Flodder episodes of Voyager had that much. And Naomi Wildman was an actual character with a personality and individuality, unlike the Doctor's kid, who is just as wooden as he is. It was an entire episode of, again, what now, suddenly feels extremely acutely like a very short season. And all just in the service of basically retconning the Daughter's Doctor out of the way of future episodes. And I'm betting they'll probably want to bring her back as a space brain magic alien kind of way, kind of like a Q stand-in perhaps, but who cares? She's a nothing character. We know nothing about her, we don't care about her, except she's a generic-ass kid and she was sick. And when she does come back, what's our attachment to her? Nothing still, because we don't even know her as a grown-up. Hell, even the damn Wesley Crusher cameo at the end of Picard's Season 2, love it or hate it, whatever, he comes back as a traveller, at least that was used to weave together some 60-year-old plot threads in a really fun and interesting way. And it worked because we know Wesley. We care about him as a character. Whether you love him or hate him, you still care about him. And sure, it was more or less fan service, but still, it worked. Point is, Doctor, interesting as a coma's kid, is meaningless. So if she never comes back, that's zero cares. If she does come back, there's still zero cares because there's no attachment to her either way. A fuck up and drop off in the quality of writing this big, this early is really, really disappointing and worrying. I can't see a day where I ever find a reason or will to rewatch this episode. So now, Strange New Worlds Season 1 is 8 episodes long for me, because this is even more pointless to re-experience than Lift Us Where the Suffering Cannot Reach is. And I hate hating on an episode of the show because I'm loving it on the whole. I mean, at worst, I'm generally indifferent to Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. It's only that it's not interesting enough or executed well enough for me to see again. And as I mentioned in my review of that episode specifically, there's another show that did the same concept in an episode of theirs, but they did it way, way, way better. But this episode was genuinely just shit. But every season of Star Trek has at least one absolute plopper of an episode. It's just the way things are. Can't be perfect all the time. But the difference is those shows have 22 to 26 episodes a season. It feels less significant to skip an episode on a rewatch. But one shit episode from a 10-episode run, that means 10% of this season is garbage, unwatchable garbage, and 20% is something I won't bother watching again. That's a significant thing. And that's on the assumption that they nail the final 2 episodes and don't shit the bed again at least once. Look, I'd love to hear from those of you who enjoyed it and why and how you enjoyed it. I want that perspective because I cannot see it from where I'm standing. But that is pretty much all I have to say, or all I want to say about this episode. I really don't want to spend much more time thinking about it outside of trying to find other perspectives. But yeah, from my own point of view, there's so little to dig into here that's interesting or insightful or thoughtful or, can be used as an allegory for anything interesting. And, as evidenced by my previous episodes of this series, I love doing that. That's one of my favorite things about doing with Trek, just pulling it apart and allegories and metaphors and things like that, outside of just enjoying it as sci-fi for its own sci-fi's sake. There's that layer too. This episode had neither of those things. Neither part of that beautiful mixture that is Star Trek works in this episode. And that's a shame. Thank you to getting to the end of the video. Hopefully I'll see you in the comments. Live long and prosper, and thank you as always to the patrons scrolling up above there who do help me to live long and prosper by, helping me afford things like food. No replicators yet. Call back. See what I did there?